Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Mitchell Sentinel podcast. Hope you all are doing fine out today. Quarantine yourself in your very comfortable abodes. Dad's got all sorts of stuff prepared for us today, and we're going to kind of deviate from last week where we ended at 1881 and just kind of do a little sidebar, and he's going to talk about some of the characters and situations around Mitchell that he knows of, and he might even read a poem or two. So go ahead, Dad.
Okay, this is kind of a delicate situation, what we're going to talk about today, but it is part of the history of this area. It deals with the oldest profession, I guess, and in the early 50s, Lady by the name of Josephine Rogers established a house of the evening here in this area. She brought 4 girls with her from Tonopah. They were traveling through, and down in Barnhouse Basin, the rancher down there had a house that was kind of semi-vacant, just nothing living in there but the rats. Well, these ladies have opportunity to see this house, and they said they stopped by, and the mother that ran the ranch wasn't there, but the boys were. So they propositioned the boys, as so to speak, about the availability of the house. So they said, sure, it'd be fine. They decided that would be right on the deal. So they had to figure out how they could get it past the mother. So she said, Mom, we met this nice little old lady the other day, and she had 4 girls, and they're really destitute. We really need a place to live for a while till they get on their feet. Well, unknown to the mother, these girls made their living on their back, so they probably wasn't never going to get on their feet. So the...
Pump. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah, anyhow, they got down there and they got established in the house, cleaned it all up and everything, and pretty soon the clientele, but the first 2 there was the boys of the owner of the ranch. They came to collect their rent, and they were going to take it out in the barter system.
How many rooms were in this house?
I don't know for sure, because the house is, well, I'll get into it, how it got destroyed.
Oh, okay.
Anyhow, I remember just barely seeing the old house. It was along the road up there, and I think all's left is a couple of poplar trees that's there now. It's right down below where the shoe tree used to be.
Oh, okay. So was it that one where the house when you come out of that cut and it was down in the draw there, or?
No, it was on the left-hand side of the road, as I recall, going towards Dayville.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anything was really, really going well, and they didn't take long. They didn't advertise much, but they didn't have to because, the men found it.
The word gets around.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Well, and at the time, there was quite a few mills, right?
Oh, yeah, they had a large
ranches.
clientele, and a lot of these guys were all bachelors, and some of them weren't either. But anyhow, they had it going pretty good until one day some do-gooder comes along, and they tell Mama what's going on really at the house.
The mother of the ranch.
Yeah, the owner, yeah. So they, Mama told the boys, said, you better go up there and tell them girls to get their stuff out of that house, because that house is burning down this afternoon. Hence, the house was gone.
Oh, so they vacated and she burnt the house down.
Well, they barely got out, yeah. Anyhow, they needed another place, so they were scouting around. They didn't have much time to scout around, so eventually they found another place. Another thing that I should probably bring up before is Josephine Rogers was actually living with my grandfather.
At that very time, or?
Shortly thereafter.
Okay. Now, where'd they set up their next house? What was the locale?
Okay, if anybody's here, it was Hanson Meadows.
Oh, okay. So just up the road here.
Yeah, right up towards Scotch Camp
So
way.
if you go up Dollarhide Road,
right,
and past the pond and over the top, you find yourself in this really nice meadow. And there is an old cabin up there. Was that it?
No. This was like I said, these ladies, they had to they had to find housing wherever they could find it, and they usually just squatted on whatever was there and fixed it up a little bit so the roof wouldn't leak. So anyhow, this is a place where Charlie Payne and I think Charlie Jackson had their sawmill up there on that deal. And these were an old abandoned, one of the old abandoned
mill cabins.
Mill cabins, yeah.
Okay.
So they moved in there, and they were there for a while, but that didn't work out too good because it was a little bit too far removed from their clientele.
Too far from town.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So they moved into Mitchell, which is we called it Smithville at one time, which is about 4 miles east of Mitchell. It's on the left-hand side, right across from where Oregon State has their
their summer geological camp.
Yeah, right. So they, in fact, I did a thing for the Oregon State Geological Camp one summer, and I went over there and I said, I think those ladies, if they had known that Oregon State was going to be their neighbors and right across the road from, they may have continued in business for a while.
Oh, yes.
But anyhow, they were there for quite some time, but it proved out to be not very well either because they were too far away from town. I mean, too close to town now.
Okay.
Because you have all these other people saying, "Hey, man, we know what's going on there, and we're going to run you out of town," and all this stuff. And so I did have one client tell me that he was next in line, but it looked like it was going to be quite a long time before it was his turn. So he thought he would entertain himself by pulling the porch off this old house.
Oh, the house in Smithville.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So he backed up to it and hooked a chain on the thing and getting ready to get back in his pickup when he heard the click on the gun as it was cocked. And Josephine said, "I don't think that would be a real good idea. I think you better unhook and just forget about this little caper you're pulling." So actually, he said the gun wasn't that big, but it sure looked big. So he
didn't pull the.
No, he did not. He went and got his chain back, and he got back, and he waited his turn.
Now, who was that?
I can't tell you.
You don't know his name, or maybe you don't want to incriminate.
No, I don't want to incriminate him. He is deceased now, so I mean, we want to leave him out let him get out with a little dignity.
But he still has family in the area.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So, and they probably know, but
well, yeah.
So from Smithville, my great grandmother, she retired off of West Branch back in the day, and she literally abandoned her house. So with her son living with the madam, it was a natural move for them, and so they moved out to West Branch.
So I never realized that that's how they ended up in that house. Was that so?
Grandpa had the connection, the family connection, yeah. Yeah,
so your great-grandmother moved out of the house.
Right.
And then her son moved in with his new family.
Yeah, right.
Quote unquote family.
Family. Yeah, family. The family, yeah. So
exactly what was his title? Your granddad's title.
Well, he wasn't near as good as my great granddad was on that side. He was
okay.
My great grandfather was a procurer and evaluator of a professional house in Portland.
Okay.
So the legacy they left me was a little different than the other side of the house gave me. So
yeah. So okay. So I guess that ran in the family. That's on the Grisham side, right?
Yeah, I could tell you where it stopped.
Yeah, I know where it stopped. And so basically, your great-grandfather was sort of like in urban communities, they call him a pimp.
The family don't prefer that, but that's probably another. Yeah, that would be close. Yeah. So they were out there, and everything was going pretty good. But the only one thing about it that to get there, most of the people had to drive by Jane Woodward's house. And Jane Woodward was keeping a book, and she, I don't know if she ever published her book or not.
But she kept a log of
she kept a log of what went by there most of the nights, yeah.
Now, at that time, was that considered the old highway, or was that after the new highway was built?
It was after the new highway was built, so there wasn't a whole lot of traffic through there. But what what traffic did go through there, you knew where it was going, most likely.
And you could kind of calculate by time where they had been.
Yeah. Plus, it was closer to Prineville, and so she expanded her clientele a little bit because it's only 36 miles from Prineville. So we got some Crook County money over here too.
Yeah, and then at that time, Beaver Guard Station was made famous by your last poem. Was it there?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was there. The ones that didn't deal in cash dealt in checks.
Oh.
So my dad laundered the checks for him. And so he always had a little cash on hand. And so whenever Josephine needed a checks cash, he brought them into my dad. And he was wanting to get the money, get rid of the money, and the checks were all good.
So he just laundered the...
Yeah, and so I think he might have had a little book too. So
interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was kind of I don't know, it's like an established organized crime circuit or syndicate, maybe.
Well, at the time, I don't know. My dad, I don't think, was committing a crime, but
by laundering the money potentially. But
he was laundering the checks, I guess.
Yeah. But it, was it 1950 what?
About back in about 1955, probably 54, 55, around there.
Okay. Everybody's fairly prosperous at that time. There was some expendable incomes.
They told one, too, said that the local clientele even established a nice little corral up there, a place to put their horses when they were doing a lot of riding up in that area.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Yeah, the horses just didn't have to stand there all afternoon. They had a nice, comfortable corral to roam around in. But I'll tell you how it ended.
Yeah, I remember you wrote a poem about it, right?
Yep, I wrote this little poem. I entitled it "The Bombing of the Local Whorehouse" in 1954. That was the date.
Okay.
This is a tale that is true, though some of the facts may be in dispute. It tells of a summertime prank when 4 unnamed activated a bomb outside the local house of ill repute. I was told there were 9 sticks of dynamite used. The charge was placed in the swamp below the structure, and it was electronically fused. The blast that followed by a huge fireball straight from the bowels of hell. By now, the folks in the house were not feeling all that well. People that were there in the house have not come forward, so no one knows. The reactions that came from within, I can only suppose. I do have an eyewitness that stated, "I saw a man jump from the 5-foot-high window and break into a run. His face was white as a sheet. His thoughts, 'My God, my wife's got a high-powered gun.' Another man appeared on the front porch, ready for a fight, unafraid as if he might know who the bombers may be. Gidget, one of the professional girls, drove under the table and covered her eyes so she couldn't see. Well, the mud settled and the blue smoke cleared, and the getaway car rolled out of sight. The bombers soon realized that we'd have to fess up because a lot of things changed that night. 2 of the professional girls, Gidget and Heidi, caught that bus the very next day. 'We're changing our vocation and quitting these flats,' was all they had to say. Now, irony is strange, and this irony is stranger than some, because one of the bombers was later heard to say the 2 girls that left were his very favorite ones.
So, okay. And if I remember right, Uncle Jack was one of the bombers.
He was one of the bombers, as was my Aunt Dorothy.
His wife.
Yeah.
And so he was the son
of the man that lived with the madam.
Yes.
The irony goes on.
Yeah,
and on and on.
A strange, vicious circle. Yeah. But at that time, there was a significant population of the area. That's probably when Mitchell reached its peak of population, was right around that time.
Probably about 415 people. They were people living in every hollow and canyon in this country.
And that was before a lot of the big ranches kind of bought up all these little small places, and so there was a lot of people, and also all the mills. Now, how many mills at the time were here?
Probably, I think about at least 4, maybe 5.
Okay. And I see you got your notebook up. You're gonna read another poem, you think?
Well, I lived through a great time. I got to meet some of the greatest people in this world, and these people, some looked on it as really simple, but their lifestyle dictated that they were simple people, and they could have fit in anywhere because they were smart folks, but they chose to live here. So this is another family member, not really related to me, but he was married to my great-grandmother for a short time. His name was Howard Ross. And Howard had this great big old handlebar mustache. And Howard was an alcoholic, and he stayed drunk most of his life, unfortunately. But he had this big mustache, and he had a little cabinet right here above town, and the kids, just for the heck of it, slipped in there one day, and they smeared a little Limburger cheese in that big old over mustache. And then they got back at the window, and they waited for him to wake up.
Gosh, he must have been a pretty sound sleeper.
Yeah, he was. Well, when you're passed out,
I guess that's true. He was drunk.
You stay there, yeah. So they had to wait a little bit, but finally he started stirring, and they seen one eye open, one nostril sniffed, seen both eyes open, and then both nostrils sniffed. He jumped up from the bed, ran to the door, threw the door open, sniffed a few more times, and he said, "I'll be damned, the whole world stinks." I thought that was a pretty clever thing on his part. We had a guy here too in town named Greenie O'Brien. Now, Greenie, in the wintertime, he didn't have much to do because when he wasn't working in the woods or working with the sheep or something, Greenie would drink beer and just run from town to town or run from business in town and start gossip. So he wanted to get a beer early in the morning. Nothing was open, so the pastime had a restaurant in there. So he convinced Hattie Harnden, who was running it at the time and was managing it, that she was missing out on the morning breakfast crowd. So he kept lobbying, and pretty soon said, "Man, there are people in here, they're wanting breakfast every morning and everything, and there's no place for them to eat and everything." All he was wanting to do was for her to open up about 9 o'clock so he could get a beer. So he kind of created this little scenario. And so the first morning she was open, nothing happened. Of course, Greenie had his beer, and he was sitting there at the bar. Hattie kept running to the door, looking out. Pretty soon she walked over to Greenie and says, "Ho hum, I wonder when you're going to come." And I don't think after 3 or 4 days, I think she gave up on Greenie's idea.
Yeah, he was just kind of hornswoggling her and just being open.
Yeah.
So he'd drink beer in the morning.
Yeah. And Greenie, he liked to create a little commotion every now and then. And he would, for 3 or 4 days, my dad, George Snay, just kind of avoided him. And he couldn't figure out why Snay was all torqued off at him. And so he finally confronted Snay. He said, "What's the problem? You got a problem with me or something?" He said, "Yeah." I said, I heard what Greenie said you said.
Oh.
He said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, he could never run Snay out of business because he lived on catfish and rabbits." and no way did my dad say that.
Well, yeah, it doesn't sound like he'd even think about it.
Yeah, but Greenie, just a chance to start something.
Stir it up.
Yeah, stir it up a little bit. And to my dad was pretty much a character, and he said he didn't know a doggone thing until he got 32 years old, and it took quite a bit of lessons for him to learn anything when he got that old. But they said he was crossing the street there between the Pink Spur and Snay's store one day, and old Bud Folsom, he was just as drunk as my dad was, and he come down his old Model A, and hit him and knocked him down.
Oh, no.
And drug him down the street about 30 or 40 yards, and he looked down and he says, he looked down through the floorboards of this old rusted out car and said, "Bob Cannon, what are you doing under there?"
I remember Bud Folston, too.
Yeah, he didn't do Dad any good. He said they had to haul him off to Prineville and get stitched up. And Atkinson was pretty intolerant towards alcohol, and he didn't. It almost scalped Dad. It pulled his hair and everything back off his forehead.
I'll bet you. I didn't know
Atkinson put about 30 or 40 stitches in his head and never used any Novocaine or nothing. He just stitched him up. So Dad was pretty tough.
Well, yeah.
And he had a friend named Mark Jordan. Everybody probably remembers old Mark. Mark, one time he went downtown, told Betty he's going downtown to get a loaf of bread, and he got the loaf of bread all right, but he didn't bring it home for 6 months, and it was still in the back window of his car when he got here, but it wasn't too good a shape.
Well, where did he go? On a hell of a drunk, I suppose. But.
Well, not really. Somebody come by and said, hey, he was operators union man, and so somebody come by and said, hey, they're hiring in Klamath Falls. And so he said, but you need to get there today. Old Mark, he just jumped in his car with his loaf of bread, and he headed for Klamath Falls, and he didn't get back for 6 months.
Didn't tell his wife or nothing?
Nothing, no.
I'll be dang.
That's just the way things were done, I guess, back in them days.
Or at least the way he did it.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I remember Grandpa Cannon telling me a story about a circus coming to town, and him and Mark Jordan were playing with a monkey or something in a cage, and that dang monkey bit Mark's finger. I don't know.
Well, you know why he bit the finger?
No, that's what I was hoping you'd say.
Okay. Well, this monkey, we had him he's on a fence post, and they had him tethered to this fence post. And old Mark, he got to teasing this monkey and teased him, and pretty soon monkey got torqued at him, and so he grabbed Mark's hat and ripped his lining out of his hat.
There we go. I knew there was something to the story.
So he took a swing at the monkey, and the monkey bypassed him. When his finger went by, he laid a lick on it. Yeah, he come out short end of the stick on that deal. But that was pretty easy for Mark. They raised Cain in school because what one didn't think of, the other one did.
Yeah.
They used to get on the flagpole out in front of the old school there, and the flagpole at that time was made out of tamarack, and it was, 20.
Now, this was the old school built in 1923,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, the old rock building.
And now that's where the EMS building is for the
Right.
town, so if people new to the area would imagine a 3-story rock building there.
Yeah, and it had a big turnout in the front. It's still there as you come around that
On the road.
on the bend. Yeah. Well, anyhow, they would get that rope off of that flagpole, and they'd get up in the second-story window and get on that rope, and they'd swing, and they'd go clear out over across the road, and then swing back on the other side. That was their adventure park for here in Mitchell time.
That's a heck of a note, because like you imagine these days kids doing that.
Yeah, no, they but their Mark and Dad did solidify their claim to fame. Their name is carved in the belfry of the Mitchell Baptist Church.
How'd they get up there?
Nobody knows.
But it's up there.
But it's there. Yeah.
I'll be dang.
Yeah. So that was a pretty good deal. We had another old guy in here by name of Mack Nichols. Now, Mack was born probably well before the turn of the century, and he got to be pretty old. And Mack had his bout with alcohol most of his life also. And he said that he was living up at Pine Creek, and he'd been drunk for a couple of days. And he said, I kept listening to that alarm clock, and it kept ticking, and it wasn't ticking. It said, get drunk, get drunk, get drunk, get drunk. And he said, you know what I did? No, I have no idea. Well, to keep from hearing that alarm clock from going, get drunk, I got up and put it in the oven.
I guess that solved that problem.
Eliminated that, yeah.
But he still got drunk.
Yeah. And later on, he got to drinking a lot of wine, and he said, he told this to Maxine Cole once. He said, wino, yeah, they call me a wino, but why don't they ever call those guys who drink whiskey, whiskey-os? But he built a lot of fence in this country, and probably hadn't been anybody built any new fence since much.
Some of it, yeah.
Yeah. I got an old friend that lived up in Waterman Flat, right where right at the base of where the what's the name of that creek that runs, Parish Creek?
Yeah, where it heads down over towards Fossil or Spray.
Yeah, his name was Eddie Price. Now, Eddie lived there all his life, never got married. But he might have been the one that went down to the house. I don't know.
In Smithville?
Yeah, it's a possibility. I mean, I've heard those things. But anyhow, Fran Cherry kind of took care of Eddie as he got older in life and everything. And Eddie had a bunch of cows, and he needed to get them sold. And so Fran hauled him over there to the sale in Redmond for him. And so Eddie asked old Fran, he said, well, how much I owe you for that hauling them cows off? Fran replied, you owe me $1.480. Eddie didn't blink an eye as he handed him $1 and wrote him out a check for $4.80. Eddie, he'd meet the mail driver at the ended right there at Waterman, and he'd meet the mail driver over there, and he always wanted to know what was going on in Mitchell. Well, every time somebody told the mail driver was June Folsom, most generally. Every time she told him something about it, he probably he'd say, "Well, I've heard that last week. I knew that was going on." Well, come to find out, Eddie lived at the end of the phone line, and Eddie he rubbered on the phone all the time. It was a party line, so Eddie knew more of the business that was going on.
Yeah, that was the old thing around here, right? You would have to wait for your ring to pick up the phone. And everybody else would kind of know whose ring it was, and sometimes they'd listen in.
They just stayed there on the phone because it was kind of like a soap opera. You learned what was going on with everybody else's business.
You'd be pretty selective of what you'd say.
Yeah. Now, Eddie had this 2-room cabin up there. It wasn't that big to begin with, but he got his tax notice, and Eddie... he thought it was too high, which probably might have,
who knows? Taxes
couldn't have been that high anyway, but it might have been too high for Eddie. Well, he got looking at the tax notice, and he said he got to thinking. This is the way he thought. It got two rooms to this cabin. I can get along just living in this one. So he said, if I take and tear that other room off of this cabin, my taxes should go down half.
They go for it?
Nobody knows, but I don't think so. I think
probably not.
Yeah.
It's too logical.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it wasn't going to work out. I had a friend. He's still alive. His name's Leonard Breck. Really enjoyed Leonard. He's a good friend. Many years, Leonard, he worked for as ag fieldman for the First Interstate Bank. And since most of his work brought him to Mitchell to represent all these farmers and ranchers over here, he would spend a lot of time at our place, my dad and I's store. And most times he would stop by the Prineville Bakery and get a dozen donuts and bring them to the store, and we'd pass them out to his clientele and eat a few of ourselves, and we'd conduct his business there. So one day we were in the First Interstate Bank, and the manager there was Charlie Dietz, and we were doing some business with Charlie, and I seen Leonard's desk sitting over there, vacant as usual. So I also seen his nameplate that was on his desk, so I sidled over to it, and I stole that thing right off of Leonard's desk. So I brought it home, and
I remember seeing it when I was a kid.
Yeah, I brought it home, and I put it right up where the phone was. We had it hanging on the wall. And about 3 or 4 days later, old Leonard came in, and he said, he seen it right off the bat as he was using the phone. He said, I was wondering where that thing went. He said, Dietz, he had seen me steal it, so he was going to make Breck buy his new one for himself. So he was glad to get it back, but he didn't quit coming over.
No. He still stops by on occasion. Right?
Yeah. Well, he's like all of us. He's gotten older. My dad and I, we had a lot of fun together after we got to working together up seemed like the time I got about 26, 27 years old, he sure got a lot smarter.
I think that happens to all young men.
Yeah. Well, anyhow.
But I'm not going to admit that you're all that much smarter.
Well, that's okay. I understand.
But you're right.
In certain areas. Anyhow, my dad, Les Schwab, he and his son Harlan did not get along all that well, and so he asked my dad, and he asked me one day. He said, "We stand there." He said, "How do you guys pull this off, working together and everything?" Everything. I said, "Well, it's a 50-50 deal, Les." 50-50? Well, yeah. I said, "Yeah. I do all the work. The old man gets all the money. I guess that's 50-50, ain't it?"
Separation tasks.
Yeah. But my dad was getting older in years, and he come over one morning, and he was grumbling and stumbling around and everything. He said, "I got an idea. Why don't you just buy me out?" I said, "I got a better idea. Why don't I just wait you out?"
Oh, that's
what I did.
That's exactly what you did.
Yeah.
Yep. Sure. I miss old Grandpa.
Yeah. We had Joe Norton. A lot of these merchants around Mitchell, I learned a lot from when I was younger, and I apply a lot of their ability and things that they taught me in those days.
Well, Joe Norton, he owned what is now the Wheeler County Trading Post.
Right, yeah.
And it used to be Norton's General Store.
Right, yeah.
Even after Huddleston's bought it, correct?
Yeah, I think, Jim he retained the name.
And so who did Joe Norton buy that store from? Do you remember?
I think of Brady.
Okay. And
family named Brady. And then before that, I think your Grandpa Cole owned it.
C.A. Cole had it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's see. There was another one. Let's see, Brady. There was one more, but I can't remember the name. Seemed like there was one more owner after that, but I can't remember the name. Anyhow, it's gone. Well, anyhow, old Joe, one morning he was in there, and Joe had developed a little pimple up on his forehead a little bit and everything, and so we had this old gal named Wicket Reed. She worked up her husband worked up at Spoo's Mill, and his name was Heine Reed. He was a truck man. He did all the tires and everything up there.
So her name was Wicket, and his name was Heine? Those nicknames.
Yeah, those were nicknames. I never did know their
real
given
names.
names.
Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But anyhow, this Wicket was pretty coarse lady. Anyhow, and so she walked in there, and she seen this pimple on Joe's chin. Forehead. Or no, it was on his forehead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, he looked at him and said, "What's wrong with your forehead there, Mr. Norton?" "No," I said, "a little pimple." I said, "I think a little bump or something coming up." And she says, "Well," she says, "I thought it might have been your belly button. Everything else in this store's so high."
That's pretty good.
Yeah, so she got a pretty good one. Anyhow, old Joe, he would say, "It's a good deal if you never use it." He might cut the price maybe 10, 20 cents and try to sell it to you anyway. I was in there one morning, and this was well after Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone, and he had left over a bunch of coonskin hats. In fact, they were been left over so long that the hair was falling out of them, and they were soon to become naked coonskin.
Now,
hats.
were they synthetic or were they actual coonskin?
Well, they were some animal. They weren't Chinese. No, they were.
But they were.
Yeah,
they were some sort of animal. Might have been dyed to look like a raccoon or something.
Yeah, but he capitalized on the craze, but then the craze died down after a few years, and he was stuck with all these hats. Yeah, so. And every time he gave you a price on something, he said, "Well, that would be $5.45 only." Only. He'd think to only make it sound cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you say it after it.
Yeah.
Instead of before it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another old guy that I really enjoyed and loved was a guy by the name of Otto Sylvie. He came in here from Oklahoma or Arkansas he was a timber cutter. Now, Otto didn't have much education, but he was one of the smartest men I've ever knew. I don't know. I think he could write his name, but that was about the extent of his writing ability, but didn't make no difference because education in Otto's hands would have probably been a dangerous weapon. I mean, that's how smart he was. And he said, you you gotta watch that old black velvet whiskey. I'm gonna do the Otto.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
You
gotta do that old black velvet whiskey. You gotta watch it. Said it'll sneak up on you and make you hang your hat where there ain't no nail.
Well, so he was one of those old school timber fallers that probably started out with just a crosscut saw and a rubber man or
I don't know if he even had the rubber man. He probably couldn't have got along with him. Not like Harvey Lawler did. That's what Harvey Lawler did. He started with his rubber man. Otto had another saying. He said, "You have to take the bitter with the sweet, but sometimes you get a little more bitter than sweet." And he said, "You can't get blood out of a turnip, but you can stomp the heck out of the greens." That's a few things. That's some of his philosophy.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. He had, they went elk hunting one fall. There was a whole slew of them. And so they got up in there and they was hunting elk, and come this tremendous snowstorm, and they got snowed in. And they couldn't get out, and nobody could get in. So the storm just kept raging and raging and raging. So they finally the storm broke a little bit, and they finally got a cat after about 3 or 4 days, and they cut a road in there and found them. And Otto, he seen them coming. He said, "Thank God you saved us. We run out of whiskey this morning."
I guess they're there in the nick of time.
Yeah. I don't know if he'd stayed there much longer. Next guy I really enjoyed, and he might have been my mentor because he was a writer and he had a great sense of humor, and he read a lot, was Ned Norton.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And anyhow, Ned, he worked for the ODOT. And so this is kind of a follow-up story to the one I told about the girls that lived down in the gorge. But old Ned, he'd go out there and with Elbert McCarty usually and Clarence Hovey. Well, Elbert McCarty was a straight-laced, straight-shooter guy, and, man, he wouldn't do nothing wrong. It would have been better if he could have. But anyhow, not old Ned and not old Hovey. They'd go out there, and they'd be working close to that house I was telling you about. Mm-hmm. I think their relationship was strictly platonic because they liked to drink whiskey more than they probably liked the girls anyway. But
so these houses they had places where they could serve you a drink and you wouldn't have to partake in the other.
Well, yeah, and Ned was such a storyteller and a great guy that they just enjoyed to have him out there because during the daytime and during the slack time there wasn't much to go on, and so
he'd just sit there and drink whiskey and spin yarns.
Yeah, and him and old Hubby would sit there and drink, and Albert did all the work because he's scared to death that somebody's going to come along and catch him, and they're all going to get fired. And he's the only one who cared about fired because Hovey and they didn't care anyway. If they got fired, they could handle it. So
I guess that's a whole different version than the standard of how they make fun of ODOT workers now.
Yeah,
these
right.
guys were doing something entirely different
well,
instead of leaning on a shovel.
Yeah, I don't think they wore any shovels out that way. They might have had to work a little harder on the west side, but on the east side they didn't get much of that done. Anyhow, they were a pair to drive to. I got tickled. Clarence once was down at the tavern and he bought this new Chevrolet car from I think it was Sam Jackson. Anyhow, his old car was just a 2-door, and this new one, it was a 4-door. So he went out to go home one night. And he come back in. They said, "Well, Clarence thought you was going home." He said, "I was, but somebody stole my steering wheel." He'd gotten in the back seat and couldn't find the steering wheel, which at that time might have been a good thing.
Yeah, that's pretty drunk if that's the case.
Didn't realize that, yeah.
Oh, one of the myths I want to kind of get rid of is that people think that the old Weinbarger house downtown was a house of ill repute, and it never was.
Never was.
And my Aunt June probably rolls in her grave every time she hears somebody say that, but it never was. It was a boarding house.
Right.
but it was never that sort of house.
Yeah, to my knowledge, there never was a house in town.
They were always out of town.
Yeah, out of town. There might have been a freelancer or two that
Well, who knows?
But that's a one-on-one kind of deal.
Yeah, that's just a separate agreement. But as far as there being one in town, there never was. I mean, probably not even somebody working the back room of the Palace Saloon. Nothing like that.
No.
Yeah, that's people think that it was so much more crazier back in the day than it probably was.
Yeah. Not that there might have been a few crazy moments.
I mean, it's been pretty crazy, but mostly just men drinking, fighting, and shooting each other. Not much of the other.
We'll later broadcasts. We'll get into these buildings and stuff around town that are still standing, and some of them that still hold historical significance, and that would be one of them. Yeah. And so, we'll say that for another podcast later.
As far as we were talking about, brothels and such, I wanted to make sure that the listeners knew that never was a house of ill repute.
Yeah, never in town. We had I got to tell this story. Jess Maxwell moved into town, and he had a ranch out here and raised his boys out there and the family and everything. But he moved into town, and Jess didn't have nothing to do, so out of boredom, Jess died. Well, his wife, Lily, which was a Bland, she had never learned how to drive because Jess did all the driving. She did run a wagon back in the day, but she didn't know how to drive a car. But he bought this 1959 Ford with a Ford Interceptor engine in it.
Okay.
It was a big hot rod and everything, but here this poor lady had this thing, and she never driven. So somebody, I guess probably the sons, attempted to teach her to drive, but she never really got the hang of it. So she had numerous fender benders and a few things going out the gate and through the back of the garage and a few things and everything. But the one thing that Lily did know, that you had to maintain these vehicles. So at 3,000 miles, she would call me and she said, "You need to do the maintenance on my vehicle, change the oil, grease it, and all that stuff." I said, okay. So people around Mitchell were pretty wary when she was on the road because they were usually off the road when she was on the road. So, and she couldn't hardly see it. You've heard the stereotypes of the little white-haired ladies with the fingertips on top, and that's all you see, the hair and the fingertips on the steering wheel.
Couldn't hardly see over the dash.
So I would pick up her car and take it down to service it, but before I did that, and on the way down, I would side the seat all the way back and sit there, and I'd put my fingertips up on the deal.
Get as low as you could.
And for a few fleeting moments, I became Lily, just to watch the reactions of the cars that I was meeting.
People swerving out of the way.
Yeah, so that's a good way to remember Lily. I had a cousin, too, that lived downtown, and he had the 2 service stations down there. I guess he had, at the time there was probably 3, so he had the monopoly. His name was Cliff Campbell. And Cliff was pretty independent sort of a feller. So one day, the guy pulls up to his pump. He said, "Just give me $2 worth, will you, please?" So old Cliff, he gets around the front of the car and looks at it, and he comes back to the driver's side. He said, "Just what I thought, a cheap SOB from California." He said, "You'll take a fill up or you won't get a drop." Well, the Californian drove off.
Yeah.
Man, he was huffed. Well, while he was driving up to the next station, Cliff was calling up his manager of that station saying, "Hey, you're going to get a car there from California here in a minute, and you make him fill up or he don't get a damn drop." Guess what? He filled up.
I bet he did.
But at the time, Monkey Ward and Sears was selling a lot of the tires and everything, and so...
This is pre-swab.
Yeah. So they'd get the tires shipped in by mail, and so they'd take them down to Cliff's after they got them all changed and everything, and said, what are you doing out there? I said, well, I'm going to air these tires up. I said, where'd you buy them? Well, I got these from Sears. He said, you should have bought your air there too, because you ain't getting any of mine. So
Gosh.
he had a way of making good customers out of people or running them off.
Yeah, proprietary.
Yeah.
But there was, at the maximum, how many stations were there back in the day?
Probably 4 or 5.
Right, in downtown.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because you were showing me and telling me which ones were which.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, there was 3, right? There was Clarence Jones's out there on the highway.
Well, yeah, he used to be down below until 56, and the flood washed him away.
Okay.
Then you come up the street, the one that Snee had.
Yep.
Across the street at one time was the hole-in-the-wall building, and it was a station.
Now, and were those operating at the same time?
The one across the street wasn't.
Okay, so they were that was staggered.
Then you had the Texaco.
Yep.
You had my dad,
Yep.
who was 76, and then the Chevrolet garage where Dennis Trenholm's shop is now, it was a Signal
Okay.
service station. So bing, bing, bing,
Yeah.
bing, bing.
And gas wars, I guess, but that's when it was like, what, 35 cents a gallon?
Yeah. The gas cost less than the tax did today.
Yep.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
But there was, 450 people near town or in, I mean, that didn't include, that was mostly people in town. And there was, there's a book at in the back of one of these Wheeler County history books shows the population at each time in Wheeler County. And so, that doesn't include the people that were in the surrounding areas that coming in from the ranches.
I think at one time in the whole county, it must have been about 1960, maybe. There were, off the top of my head, over 3,000 people here in Wheeler County.
And that's over double what it is now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but anyhow, back to Cliff. He also sold a few parts. So he'd have these guys come in and said, well, I need a set of points and plugs and stuff for my car. How much are going to be? Oh, they said, man, that's way too much money. I said, I can get them at Sears. He says, how long will it take to get here? Oh, he said, about a week. He said, you come back in a week and I'll sell them to you the same price. But Cliff moved to Prineville, and Cliff kind of liked to drink a little bit too and everything, so police get a call, somebody's hit a fire hydrant, and we had a geyser in downtown Prineville. So they got there, and Cliff, I guess, they insinuated he might have been drunk. So they wrote him up a DUI, and he got to the court date, everything. So he claimed that he really wasn't drunk. He said the reason he didn't see the fire hydrant was he sneezed, and every time you sneeze, you close your eyes. So I don't know if that was the only time that's ever used for a defense or not, but it might have been. But Cliff was trying to I don't think he talked him out of the ticket, but I think it was happened.
Like you're saying, all these old fellows were pretty dang clever.
Yeah, right.
Even if they were a bunch of drinkers and getting in trouble and such, they at least they had a clever way of putting things.
I had a guy, I'm not going to mention any names on this one either, but he said he was in the courthouse giving the sheriff heck one day, and the sheriff said he'd wrote him up, one of his deputies wrote him up for a Dewey. He said, you know what, I've been driving drunk in Wheeler County all my life, and you're going to write me up for a Dewey now? Another guy I'd like to talk about today is Lyle McFadden. Now, Lyle was an extraordinary guy. He just a practical joker, a smart guy. He'd been around. He'd done a little bit of everything. He actually worked for my grandfather at the Palmyra Trosper mine in Antone, and he worked for George Trosper, Erickson's. He worked up there a lot. Now, Lyle knew that Trosper was irrigating, and so he knew what Trosper would do. Trosper would go up the head of the ditch. He'd turn the ditch in and let the water come down. Then he'd get down there before it went into the field, and he'd lay down beside the ditch, and he'd put his hand in the ditch, and that way when the water got there, the cold water would wake him up, and he knew it was time to turn the water in. Well, this one time, he went down there and did that very same thing. But Lyle, he got down there right afterward, and he waited until he went to sleep. He turned the water in on George. George woke up and he was wringing wet. He said, "Lyle McFadden, I know you're here someplace." So he didn't fool him. But they said Lyle, he stopped by Erie Laughlin's once, which was the 101 ranch, the one that Jim Bob owns now.
Yeah.
He had been down to Salem to pick up a guy to work for George and Trosper. And so this guy, they went in, they were talking to Erie and got to visiting, maybe having a little schnapps. And anyhow, guy excused himself and went outside to the outhouse. And while he's out there, old Lyle said, "You know what? This guy's crazier than a loon." He said, I had to go down to the nut farm in Salem and pick this guy up. He just got out, everything. And old Erie, he was getting kind of wary of this guy a little bit. And so pretty soon it came Lyle's turn to go to the outhouse. And the other guy had gotten back. And so Lyle finished his chore and come back in there, and Erie said, "Lyle, you a liar, you're a liar, you're a liar." He said, "This guy's twice as smart and not near as crazy. You didn't get him out of the nut house." Anyhow, Lyle worked for Tom Cole down at Twickenham, and he irrigated and did all the stuff down Roe Creek Ranch. Well, anytime anybody shot a pheasant down there, or Lyle shot one, he'd high-neck these pheasants and save the head. And then in the Sunday afternoons, old Lyle, he'd go over and he'd stretch these heads and necks on sticks just as high as what the alfalfa was. And he was prepared for the Sunday after-church shooters. So he would get back in the house, and the cars would start coming down the road. He'd see this one, and they'd jump out and shoot these pheasants, and the pheasants just disappear, of course. They jump the fence, get over on the other side. Excuse me. Anyhow.
Catch trespassers that way.
Well, no, he didn't care. He didn't care about catching the trespassers. He just having fun with these people. They jump the fence, run over there, and they find a head and the stick, and they knew they'd been had, so they jump back on the other, and old Lyle give it a few minutes. He'd go back up and set them back up again, get ready for the next line. But he had a great time doing that. It was a Sunday afternoon entertainment for old Lyle.
All right, that reminds me of the time when you found it was a buck mount.
Old Scruffy.
At the dump.
Yeah.
And then every hunting season you'd put it up between the dump and downtown, and we'd just see how many times that thing would get shot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I finally had to junk him because his horns just kept folding together. He'd been shot in the head so many times.
I think I remember you left it up at least through doe season once.
Yeah. I didn't have it up 10 minutes and I heard the first shot. Looked like he's just looking over this little. I wrote a little poem about it. We might do that later on.
Yep.
When we get a deal. Anyhow, back to Lyle. He afforded me the ultimate compliment. And I really did accept it as a compliment, too, because, Lyle says to me, he says, "You know what? There's only 2 assholes in all of Wheeler County, and you're both of them."
Oh, wow.
That is the ultimate compliment.
That's a pretty good compliment.
Yeah.
Well, we better shut her down. We're running long today, but dang, some good stories about all these old characters in there, Dad.
Yeah, we got more of them coming.
Yep, we'll save some for next time. But thanks, folks, for tuning in, and we'll get this up on YouTube, like I keep saying, we'll be available on all platforms. So we're just trying to figure this out and get this done and working on it in between all the other stuff that we have to do. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope you all stay disease and virus free. And be safe out there.
And may the good Lord take a liking to you.